Let's run it back to the late 80s, early 90s with Andre Agassi and his challenge court. Welcome back to the channel, and if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. On today's episode, we're going to run it back with one of my favorite tennis players of all time, Andre Agassi and his challenge court. Now, Andre Agassi was a young athlete that came in the late 80s, early 90s and playing tennis. Now, tennis early on was known as a gentleman's sport, where it wasn't too flashy, so it was kind of like golf where you couldn't wear too much flashy things. But in the early 90s, this young kid named Andre Agassi changed the face of tennis forever. As a professional tennis player in the late 80s, he was being trained by the coaching staff of Nick Bollettieri, one of the most famous tennis coaches of all time. Nick Bollettieri, he had a camp that was sponsored by Nike. So he was already under the Nike umbrella as a Nike athlete when he came in to professional tennis. One of the first models that Andre Agassi wore as a pro athlete in tennis was the Nike Air Trainer 1. Now, like I said before, tennis was a gentleman's sport, kind of like golf. There wasn't a lot of flashy colors. There wasn't a lot of color. It was more white and black, maybe some greens, but there wasn't a lot of flashy colors. So in the early 90s, I believe, don't quote me on this, but tennis was trying to market to the young youth. And what was young and hip at the time was the neon colors in the early 90s. In certain tennis markets, you were allowed to wear flashy clothing on the tennis courts. There was a few tennis courts, such as Wimbledon, that won't let you wear any flashy colors. They were only allowing you to wear white uniforms, white shirt, white shorts, and white shoes. You weren't allowed to wear those flashy colors. And there's a story about Andre at Wimbledon having to change out of his flashy colors and having a Nike all-white outfit. As the years went on, Andre Agassi started getting better, and Nike took notice that we had this athlete already under our contract, that we could use him to sponsor our products. Now, Andre Agassi had a flashy way of playing. Nike noticed that. I believe tennis also noticed that Andre Agassi was a very flashy, outspoken tennis player. I think at the time in the late 80s, tennis was struggling to get young athletes to play the sport. So I think Nike and the tennis organization tried a little bit of a different way of marketing to the young youth with these flashy colors that were popular in the 90s. And what better player to sponsor your product and start something flashy than the flashiest player in tennis at that time in Andre Agassi. So what they came up with, Nike, Andre Agassi, and a couple designers at Nike, they came up with this new product line called Challenge Court that was put out for men, women, and youth. These new flashy colors, which in my opinion was one of the greatest ideas that tennis had, and Nike. Now, at this time, Andre Agassi was just a spokesman for the product. He did not have his actual own shoe called the Air Agassi, but he had his own shoe under the Challenge Court name. I do not have the Air Tech Challenge 1, but it was one of the first models for Andre Agassi. His second model, which I think is one of his most popular models, is the Air Tech Challenge 2, where Andre Agassi played a lot of tennis games in this shoe with a lot of excitement, and the outfits that went along with the Air Tech Challenge 2 Lava is probably one of the greatest tennis gear of all time, and there has been a lot of throwbacks to this outfit over the years. A few models under the Air Tech Challenge line was the Air Tech Challenge 2 Clay. Well, I consider this an Andre Agassi shoe, but this was more worn by John McEnroe as he wanted to sport the Challenge Court line as well. At this time, he was on the verge of going out in his career, but this was probably one of the newest models that he wore before he retired. Another Tech Challenge 2 would be the Tech Challenge 2 Pixels, also not really worn by Andre Agassi, more worn by a lot of Nike athletes under the umbrella, including John McEnroe. The Air Tech Challenge 2 was also designed by Tinker Hatfield. And you could see a lot of cues from this shoe that you could see in the Air Jordan 4 or even the Air Trainer 3. The wings here, the air bubble here, and the midsole is very similar, reminiscent to the Air Jordan 3, one of the greatest design shoes, in my opinion, Nike has ever produced. And this was my very first model that I can remember having as a kid. This, the Air Trainer TW, and the Air Jordan 6 was one of my very first Nike shoes. Since we're on the topic of the Nike Tech Challenge 2, there was a very limited release of the Air Tech Challenge 2 that matches his shirt and his shorts. This was just a special edition that came out as a tribute shoe to his wardrobe in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, in my opinion, I think the Air Tech Challenge, or the Challenge Court line, took off in 1990-91 with this colorway of the Air Tech Challenge 3, which made him blow up into the superstar that he is. As in, there was a lot of commercials and advertisements and everything you could imagine that went along with this shoe. And that flaming tennis ball at the back heel is probably one of the coolest design logos in Nike's archive. I don't know if you knew this, but the Air Tech Challenge tennis ball logo, the Challenge Court tennis ball logo, was designed by Fluke, as the artist spilt his ink over his paper and looked down, and the ink splatter looked kind of like a tennis ball, and then he exaggerated the lines, and he said that would be a pretty cool logo. And in my opinion, I think it's one of the greatest logos that Nike has ever created, as the tennis ball flying through the air with that splatter paint coming behind the ball is just one cool logo. And if you hit the ball as loud as you can, you could see the purple and orange Air Tech Challenge 3. One of my favorite models of the Air Tech Challenge line is the Air Tech Challenge 4, which came out in 1992, I believe. If I'm wrong, hit me up in the comments, but I think it came out in 1992. This one here is the retro from 2016, which was a European release only. And at the time, this one was so hard to get, but I luckily found this overseas at a shop that was able to ship to Canada. And this model is one of my favorite. At this time, Andre Agassi was winning championships, running Planet Hollywoods, working and sponsoring. Andre Agassi was one of the biggest celebrities. Now, after the Air Tech Challenge 4, there was a few more models in Nike's repertoire. There was Air Tech Challenge Huarache, which I don't have. I used to have a couple of these models, but I don't have them in my collection at the moment. There was the Challenge LWP. There was the Air Alarm. There was the Nike Air Flare. There was the Nike Zoom Challenge, which is one of my favorites that I never had. Also worn by John Stockton of the Utah Jazz as a basketball shoe. And the Zoom Pounce, which is, in my opinion, the ugliest one. But there's a few more after that. And then Andre Agassi signed with Adidas for the rest of his tennis career. I would say a couple years ago, Andre Agassi signed a contract with Nike again, and Nike started producing the Andre Agassi line, and they blew it up and started producing his Challenge Court line. All his shirts came back. So it's nice to see Nike pay tribute to one of their troubadours of their brand from the early 90s. I hope there's more Andre Agassi retros on the way. I know there's a lot of us Andre Agassi heads that really want to see the Air Tech Challenge 4 release in the United States and Canada again. Hopefully the Charisse color comes back, which I'm pretty sure it would if they did bring it. But us original heads would really like to see the Air Tech Challenge 4 Ginger to re-release again. I hope they continue with the Challenge Court line and produce some more throwbacks to one of the greatest tennis players of all time and one of the great lines that Nike has ever produced. As you've probably noticed, some of the Nike athletes of today have thrown it back and worn some of the Agassi outfits in their matches. Most noticeably, Denis Shapovalov. Thanks again for watching the content this week. Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Foresight23. And until next time, hit the ball as loud as you can.